that we're not neurotechnology experts, but we hope to have a very interesting debate around the opportunities and challenges, and certainly the governance of neurotechnologies here today. My name is Andrea Rodríguez. I'm the lead digital policy analyst of the European Policy Center, and we're organizing this event in collaboration with the Spanish Presidency of the Council of the EU. So I will give now the floor to Alberto Gago, advisor in digital and tech from the State Secretary of Digitalization and AI in the Ministry of Economy and Digitalization of the Government of Spain. So thank you very much.
Hi everybody. First of all, thank you to the APC for having the time and the effort and putting the effort and the energy to get this debate forward. The Spanish presidency has set a number of priorities for a number of months now that we presented already in the Council in the Telecom Council in June. And some of these priorities encompassed the fact that the European Union needs to consider a rights-oriented digital transformation which leads to a human-centric approach. With that, some of you may know already that we had a digital rights charter that we published in 2020. That also we helped or influenced or inspired in some way the European Declaration on Digital Rights and Principles. We also adopted an Ibero-American digital rights charter, which with countries like Chile and others in the Secretary General for Ibero-America, and we arrived to a commitment in the OECD as well, with 38 states of the OECD, including Japan, US, the UK, and others, that we need to work on a digital transformation that puts the rights of the people at the center. And why it's important for us to put the rights of the people at the center is because rights gives guarantees to people when they are using technology, or when they are in the online, they can get those rights and activate them afterwards. While if we focus only on principles, it's difficult then to concretize them in a particular manner. With this, we thought that the presidency should also focus on how to enhance the debate of the European Union towards this matter of digital rights, not only in a way that offline rights that we enjoy should be the same online, but also looking at the possibilities of whether we need to claim new rights. We have seen this, for example, with AI. The regulation on AI has put forward some rights or is going to put a framework that is going to protect individuals and their fundamental rights when using AI. But we think that there are other emerging technologies like neurotechnology that need to start thinking or having a debate or a reflection to put a similar approach. And this is why in our condition of presidency, we would like to ensure that this debate is reflected and it's influencing somehow the next commission that is going to start from 2024. I'm not going to go into too much detail now because I would like the rest of the panelists to explain. But just to mention that we are, this issue of neurotechnologies, we are also considering it a priority for the next Informal Telecom Council, where this issue will be discussed, among others, from the perspective of digital rights, which is an interesting matter, so that this debate is also being held within other, area, or let's say, spaces of the Brussels bubble. No? That's why we came to the APC and we asked them whether it's possible to co-organize this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alberto. And I would like to also present the rest of speakers joining us today. We have Thibaut Kleiner, Director of Policy, Strategy and Outreach at DigiConnect in the European Commission, Trinidad Sanoa, First Secretary of the Mission of Chile to the European Union, Mark Dempsey, Senior Advocacy Officer, Article 19, and we will be having also online, but he's having some connectivity issues, but I hope he will be able to join us soon, Paul Nemitz, Principal Advisor on Digital Transformation from DigiJust in the European Commission. Before giving the floor to the rest of the panelists, we also had two additional panelists who, instead of coming here, decided, because they couldn't make it, to send small videos explaining to them why neurotechnology and neurorights is an important topic, and why do we need to have these conversations within the Brussels bubble, as Alberto said. So we will proceed to watch a small introductory video from Lina Galvez Muñoz, member of the European Parliament, and then from Rafael Yuste from Columbia University, who has been really vocal about this topic.
Good morning, and thank you very much to the European Policy Center for organizing this hybrid policy dialogue on such an important matter, the need to update Europe's regulatory framework to cope with the challenge of advanced neurotechnology. I would also like to thank the distinguished speakers for their attendance. I'm sure that this discussion will be very fruitful, and I apologize for not being able to be there with you. A few days ago in Spain, we woke up with the news that a group of girls, minors, were victims of sexual violence. Their schoolmates created fake nude photos of them using artificial intelligence. The application of this new artificial intelligence and the neurotechnology in our daily life are a reality, and so is the capacity they have to confuse us and attempt us against our privacy, security, and autonomy, especially those of the most vulnerable. And what would happen when they can access our neurodata? A real neurotechnology race is underway in which multinational technologies companies have everything to gain. In the United States, private investment in neurotechnology is estimated to be 6 times higher than public investment. Who controls and finances these new technologies is key to understanding the challenges they pose for democracies and fundamental rights. We talked about all this in an event organized on Neurorights last November here at the European Parliament with the Spanish neurobiologist at Columbia University, Dr. Yuste. And Dr. Yuste pointed out with neurotechnology, we could become a different species. Neurotechnologies allows us to decode not only conscious thought, but also unconscious one, making it possible for a device external to an individual's brain to have more information about him or her than the subject does. Third parties will be able to access a person's thoughts, intimate information, and brain integrity, and be able to cure illness or alter personal thoughts for mercantile, political, other purposes, good and bad purposes. When we talk about whether we still have time to encrypt our thoughts to protect them so that no one can decide for them, the answer was frightening. With today's algorithm, at best, they will be protected for another 20 years. Therefore, not only the scientific and legal community, but also the politicians, we have the responsibility to regulate the recognition and protection of neurorights, our neurodata, to create a new legal framework specifically aimed at protecting the brain, its autonomy, and its activity. And it has to be done with the ultimate goal of not increasing existing inequalities and even take advantage of the potential and knowledge of neuroscience to close existing gaps. At the same time, we ensure free equal access to neurotechnologies and protection against bias. Note that there is no discrimination based on data obtained through algorithm or artificial intelligence. It is imperative to regulate at all levels. At the national level for governments to protect individuals by companies, but also the European level in order to protect individuals from the use of neurotechnology by governments too. And in this respect, I'm afraid to say that we are late, although there is some progress. The European Parliament adopted the European Declaration on Digital Rights principles following the green light from the Council, a declaration of potential to guide future legislation that focuses on empowering citizens to make the most of the opportunities offered by the digital transition, but with no specific mention of neurorights. Given that this is the time of the Spanish presidency, I cannot fail to point out that in Spain, the Charter of Digital Rights, approved in July 2021 and guided the European regulation, opens the door to a future approval on neurorights. Therefore, I really hope that in the coming month, we will continue to work at the European level on the challenge that neuroscience poses to our democracies and enhance the European Union legal frameworks for neurotechnologies. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope with the Spanish presidency will we be able to lead this process. Thank you very much.
And now we have another video from Rafael Yuste, to whom Lina made a mention.
My name is Rafael Yuste. I'm a professor of neuroscience at Columbia University, and I'm also the director of the Neurotechnology Center. And I'm sorry I cannot be there with you today, but I wanted to give a few remarks discussing what is this business of Neurorights and why do we need them. First, let me tell you a little bit about neurotechnology. So what is neurotechnology? Neurotechnology are devices and methods that can do two things. They can either be used to measure the activity of the brain or to change the activity of the brain. So these devices can be electrical, like brain-computer interfaces that you can either wear on top of your head or be inserted inside your brain with invasive neurosurgery. They can also be optical, magnetic, acoustical, chemical, based on nanotechnology. There are many different types of devices. So why is neurotechnology important? Well, it turns out that the brain is not just another organ of the body. The brain happens to be the organ that generates all the mental and cognitive activities of humans. So it's the site of our minds. And because of that, methods to get into the brain, to record brain activity, or to change it, by definition, could allow to get into the mind, record the mental activity, and change mental activity. These methods are being developed throughout the world, particularly in the last 2 decades, for reasons that are scientific, to try to understand how the brain works. This is the kind of thing that we do in our laboratory, but also for reasons that are medical, to try to help patients that suffer from brain diseases, either mental or neurological diseases. And I'm sure every one of you has family members or friends that suffer from these brain diseases. So with these methods to get into the brain and be able to find out what's wrong with the brains of patients and help cure them. So neurotechnology is in an explosive growth phase now, thanks to the launching of the US Brain Initiative by President Obama in 2013. So this initiative employs over 550 laboratories in the US and around the world, and has been followed by many initiatives of similar caliber in China, Japan, Europe, Australia, Canada, Israel. So you can imagine South Korea, that the whole world is involved in this race to build better neurotechnology for the scientific and medical reasons, but also for commercial reasons, because access to brain data could revolutionize the tech industry. In fact, we've estimated that now most of the investment going into neurotechnology is coming from the private sector. So this is fantastic. So why are we worried about this? Well, we're worried because, again, the brain is not just another organ of the body, and this technology can offer the opportunity to decode and manipulate mental activity. Is this science fiction? It's not science fiction. In laboratories like myself, we've been doing this routinely with laboratory animals like mice, where we can implant artificial images in the heads of mice and control their behavior. They essentially behave as if they're seeing these images that they're not really seeing, that we're actually putting into their brains with neurotechnology. What we can do in a mouse today, you can do in the future in a human. Also, the big investments in new technology are paying off, and almost every day there's new reports of successes in brain decoding, particularly in patients just about not so long ago, a team from UCSF, led by Eddie Chang, who's actually a colleague of mine, an excellent neurosurgeon, was able to decode speech from a paralyzed patient from using recordings of brain activity. And also they even built an avatar of the person, of the face of the person, with all the facial expressions. So this just shows you what you can do today. So the power of neurotechnology made a group of us in 2017 think very hard about the ethical and societal consequences of neurotechnology. And we came up with the idea of new types of human rights that we call neurorights or brain rights to protect brain activity from the abusive use of neurotechnology. So we highlighted the 5 neurorights: the right to our mental privacy, the right to our own identity, to our own self, the right to our own freedom, our own liberty when we make decisions, our own agency, and finally, the right to equal access to neuroaugmentation, and also the right of protection from biases of the algorithms used by neurotechnology in the brains of humans. So the group, the Morningside group, we published this paper in Nature in 2017, and this group was made by 25 experts representing all the brain initiatives from all over the world, and having also representation from experts in neurosurgery, neurology, researchers like myself, ethics, law, artificial intelligence, etc. Since then, we've been in a campaign to push, we and other people, to push the idea that we need new types of human right level protection for brain activity and the information that comes from it. And working with several countries, particularly with the Republic of Chile, Chile changed its constitution, made a constitutional amendment to protect brain activity and its information. And there are similar constitutional amendments going on in Brazil, in Mexico, and there's interest also in Spain. And we've also worked with the UN, with the Human Rights Council in Geneva, to consider adding extra protection for mental privacy to some of the most important human rights treaties in the UN. So this is just some of the things that are going on. I encourage you to take this issue very seriously. We're really making decisions that could have a huge influence in the future of humanity. And I encourage you to think that the brain is not just another organ, that is the organ that makes you who you are. And because of this, it deserves extraordinary levels of protection. Thank you.
Now, before proceeding to the panel, I would like to pick up on some points. So we have had already like some questions about access and control that I think that it's interesting for us to consider, but also about the opportunities for neurotechnologies to actually provide new levels of wellness and to solve us or help us solve and mitigate. Like, for example, Rafael Yuste was like mentioning issues related to, for example, health. So how can we just have a balanced approach to this technology? And to me, it really echoes the debates that we had around like other emerging technologies, such as on AI. And I want to speak about this perhaps in a present tense, because it doesn't necessarily mean that we have solved the equation in here. But at least I think that then, for example, my first reaction would be that indeed, as technology advances, how can we catch up with regulation? How can we create governance frameworks that allows us to deal with the risks and challenges of these new technologies? Now we're particularly discussing neurotechnologies, but also I think that in this particular case, do we need specific frameworks because of the specificities of these new technology? Interestingly enough, as I was listening to Rafael, I couldn't agree more. But then I was wondering that what is the difference between these technologies, and why do we need like this specific rights? Can we just not solve it by using, I don't know, like the code of conduct that doctors use? So just like this a tiny little provocative thought. So now, I would like to give the floor to the rest of my panelists, and I'm really happy to have here the right people to speak about this. So first, Thibaut, do we need neurotechnology governance? What are your first reactions to these speeches?
I think that's probably the right question. But before I try to answer, I wanted to congratulate you to organize this event, and also the Spanish presidency, especially today, because I just wanted to mention that the 30th of September 2023 marks the end of the Human Brain Project, which started exactly 10 years ago. And this is, I mean, as usual, the Americans are very good at marketing, so we tend to speak more about Elon Musk activities than what is happening in the EU. But this project has been extremely successful. More than 600 million euros were spent in cutting-edge research. 155 institutions were involved, 19 countries, more than 3,000 publications in a number of areas dealing with the brain. And I think that I wanted to just mention one or two examples of what came out of this. But also on your question, start by saying that in a way, the brain is not we are not discovering it today. I mean, if you look at even mummies, of pharaohs, were subject to some form of brain surgery, as we can see. And I think in the 1940s, there were yearly something like 300,000 lobotomies that were performed on individuals. So today, I think we are at a different level, because I think the science has evolved. But it is not the first time we are dealing with issues linked with the brain, and it's not the first time that medical applications are being developed to deal with challenges. In this brain project, I just would pick two very successful research results that were delivered. Precisely on neuroscience and using interfaces, because I think this is where the link with the digital technologies is most interesting. There was the possibility through an implant for blind people to be able to see again, thanks to this interfaces that was developed in the brain project. And there was also through digital implants the possibility for people who were disabled to start walking again. I think just saying that you can see the fantastic benefits that these technologies can have, not to mention all the elements around, the degenerative diseases. I mean, we are in aging populations in Europe. Alzheimer, dementia are all issues where these technologies can be extremely beneficial. So I think we need to be a little bit careful not to overlook the benefits that neuroscience and neurotechnologies can bring. And at the same time, and just in the same spirit at what the Commission did with this recent communication, virtual words, I think we need to be also mindful that there are new technologies emerging all the time, especially in the digital field, and with the acceleration in particular of AI potentials. So in a way, and this was, I think, also what Alberto was saying, and our key messages around digital rights and principles has been rather to say that the same rights apply offline and online. And I think this is already a major message, because very often people think that when they go online, when they use digital technologies that they don't fully understand, they have no rights. They are just in the hands of the technology. And this is something we need to change, because it's not correct. And even if you are using neurotechnologies, your rights apply. So the key question, I think, is the time now to embark into a new adventure and saying that there are new issues and new rights that are needed. At this stage, I think that we would rather be cautious and try to exploit what is on the table. I think when you look at the applications of neurotechnologies, and very much in the same spirit as the AI regulation that we propose, we say there may be risks, but let's look at these risks seriously in terms of what applications from the technology we want to control and sometimes even prevent when we are dealing with human rights, actually, the AI Act is saying that applications of AI should be prohibited. So, I mean, I think this is a very, very valid model. And when talking about human rights, there are protocols, as you were saying, around medical applications, which are extremely advanced. Maybe not in the US as much as in Europe, because they don't have exactly the same degree of protection of personal data. But nevertheless, the protocols are extremely advanced. And again, it's not the first time that we are somehow treating brain dimensions and trying to also engage with advanced technology. So in essence, and I'm really curious to also engage in this conversation, I think it's important to start it, because it's not the first time we have a new development and acceleration around technologies like neurotechnologies. Their potential is enormous. There are certainly also risks. You can imagine, manipulation being one of them. But I would say that we should first look at where we are with these technological developments, not slow down on our research efforts. And I think building on the Human Brain Project, there is a lot we can do, especially in Europe, to design the technology in line with our values, in line with our digital principles. And to me, this is also the challenge. We should make sure that we do it so that it would fit with our expectations and not necessarily import it from China or California. And final point, indeed, let's start the conversation, because if indeed there are gaps, we should be ready to tackle them. But first, let's not prevent these fantastic innovations to materialize.
Thank you very much, Thibaut. I think that that very last point was very important. And I think that we had like similar questions when we were like discussing about the specific rights, whether we need specific rights to be applied to new technologies. And as you mentioned, this is not going to be the last conversation we have about a novel technology emerging that presents a new set of challenges. So thank you for your words of caution. And now I would like to go to Trinidad. Chile has been a pioneer in the protection of neurotechnology. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about it.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for your interest in learning about the Chilean experience in ensuring protection of fundamental rights while ensuring also the advance of neurotechnologies. Because as Thibaut said, there are many benefits in developing these technologies, and Chile wants to see them advance with respect of fundamental rights. I think in that sense, we agree with high authorities and the European view that creating a legal framework and having a common understanding of challenges or risks, it's key to create trustworthiness in technologies that are offered in benefit of the population across the world, of course. So I feel personally very honored to be in this panel, in which Dr. Yusta also sent us a message, because he has been, and his work and ideas have been instrumental in the process of Chile and its development of becoming a pioneer country in creating Neurorights governance framework. So it all started in 2020 with conversations with scientific communities, both national and international, and also, of course, with the support of Neurorights Foundation, led by Dr. Yusta. This ended December 2020 with the commission of future challenges from the Chilean Senate, presenting two bills of law. So the first one was intended to give a constitutional level to the protection of the brain and its activities and data produced by brain. And the second one, it's a law which is still being discussed in our Congress to implement protection of neurorights. So the bill that was approved is the reform of the Constitution that was passed unanimously and published in October 2021, and has one single article stating the right of all people to protect brain activity as well as the information derived from it. That's a direct quote of the most important bit of it. And it's a very important bit because as Dr. Yusto was saying, and this motion, this parliamentary motion was very influenced by the work, as I said. It enshrines the neuroprotection at the constitutional level because it sees the brain, as he said, not just an organ, but an organ which is key in human dignity. So in the face of these new techniques, the human brain is not exhausted in just the organ, but in the essence of what defines each of us as the particular human being that each of us are. So two particular novel elements from this approach is one, the legal asset which is being protected by this new constitutional right is human dignity. And the second one is the precautionary approach, because we all know that neurotechnologies are advancing. We don't know yet the full potential or each technology and its specific impact. But we believe that given the depth of the impact that it could have in our brains, it is worthwhile to protect potential irreversible risk damage. So at least we have like this constitutional reform which is in force. This reflects the cross-cutting position in the country that these new rights are to be protected as we developed neurotechnologies. And Chile has had a very active position in looking to create global consensus, regional and global consensus on the protection of these rights. So the Organization of American States, the Inter-American Juridical Committee, approved the Declaration on Neuroscience, Neurotechnologies, and Human Rights, New Challenges for the Americas. That resolution was inspired by the constitutional process, the amendment process that was going on in Chile. This was adopted in August 2021. Then at global level, as many of you may know, in November 2021, all UNESCO members approved a recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence, which in its article 126 refers to the ethical issues relating to artificial intelligence-based systems used in neurotechnologies. And for us, that's very important. Chile has been very active in working with UNESCO and CAF Development Bank in implementing the recommendation at regional level as agreed at that global meeting. We are hosting next month in Santiago the first summit, ministerial summit on the implementation of that recommendation. So it's ethics in artificial intelligence. That will kickstart a regional process in discussing how Latin America and the Caribbean wants to implement ethics on artificial intelligence, including the relationship with this technology and neurotechnologies. And we think this is key, given the global processes that are undergoing at different institutions, most notably G7, OECD. We think regions such as ours, it's very important that they can have a voice, a united and clear voice, to showcase the perspective of Latin America in the development of these technologies. especially given agreed the agreement we have in working towards our common agenda put forward by Secretary General of United Nations. And finally, Chile is currently a member of the Human Rights Council in the UN, and we have been a part of the core group that is working on the resolution on neurotechnologies and human rights, working towards the first step was to get an agreement, to begin a study to really understand the impacts of neurotechnologies, and based on that, to create common language, common definitions, and create a common understanding of not only the benefits, of course, but also the risks of neurotechnologies in protecting fundamental rights. So that's it.
Thank you very much, Trinidad. I think that as we kickstart this conversation in Europe, that overview that you gave, not only like focusing on what Chile has done in this constitutional process, but also like which other processes are being open in different fora. You mentioned UNESCO, you mentioned like many other like regional organizations in which this topic has been like definitely more spoken about, and then Europe like also like gave us an overview of like different frameworks that are emerging. So I think that that to us it's something that we can see as very useful. And now I would like to turn to our last speaker for input remarks, because Mark, there was one quote from the videos that said, "Brain data can revolutionize the tech industry," and to some extent that like really got into my brain. So I wanted to hear your views on this topic, considering that this is something that you have been working on for a long time, precisely the relationship between data and rights in technology.
Thank you very much, Andrea, and lovely to be here. I was sort of drafted in relatively late, so I sort of panicked when I woke up this morning and said, "Oh God, I've got this panel to appear on." But no, I'm delighted to be here, because I think in the Brussels bubble, so to speak, civil society, unfortunately, is often underrepresented. So I'm delighted to have such a broad range of people here who I can attack. I'm obviously joking. So really, I think it's a huge topic, and we could talk all day about this. I think when Thibaut talks about innovation and letting it innovate, this can happen parallel with considerations about risks and human rights, and I think that's how it has to happen. So I've prepared some notes, which I'm just going to pose some questions when we think about regulating. If there is deregulation around neurotechnologies, what kind of questions could you pose that take in human rights considerations? So firstly, I just want to open with a quote by Susie Allegra, the human rights lawyer. So she kind of frames it well as in where we are. So researchers in facial recognition AI systems claim to be able to read political affiliation from a photograph. Social media companies analyze posts for indicators of personality traits. Fitness trackers are attempting to move into mood tracking, and new brain scanning lie detectors have been used by prosecutors in Indian courts, arguably infringing the rights to avoid self-incrimination. Even if the claims for such technologies are so far overblown, they all represent novel attempts to intrude into what used to be a private mental space. So this is where we are. Now, I'm here today, I might add, in more personal capacity. I think like many civil society organizations, we haven't reached a position on neurotechnologies. And it's clear from the mood in the room, we're at the start of a conversation. And I've mentioned, I think, to some people in advance of this conversation that I've been watching recently Azeem Azhar, who's a renowned future technologist who talks about primarily how the private sector is developing. But of late, when it comes to neurotechnologies, he started thinking about rights. And this is actually quite novel for Azeem, because he's a very much a self-proclaimed sort of capitalist on speed, so to speak. He's always talking to venture capitalists, academics, and how to develop new technology. But now he's actually beginning to look at rights. So when someone like Azeem Azhar looks at rights, then you know we need to start taking rights when they're associated with neurotechnologies in particular. So a few facts. So neurotechnologies can now read or even manipulate our mental states to help us relax, learn, or reduce pain. And what do? They harvest data. How novel, do you think? In the past 5 years, over $1 billion have been invested into neurotechnologies. Companies will essentially be let into our brains. There is now an urgency because these technologies are getting better and better at an exponential rate. Well-known legal scholar Nita Farhani believes that in 5 years, the technology will be mature and widely available at scale across society. So in other words, the time is now ripe for the Commission, for example, to be proactive in thinking how or if this should be governed or not. So I just want to frame a few questions. And I think these are, I don't want to sort of pinpoint the Commission every time, but something that the Commission can use when they're considering these technologies. So question 1, does the neurotechnology in question appear to be able to comply with human rights standards, such as the legality, necessity, and proportionality test? If not, a ban is called for, such as that when Article 19 called for a ban on emotion recognition, because the intended applications present risks that are too high for society to take, and very often disproportionately impact historically marginalized groups. Civil society actors have also called for bans on the use of certain AI-enabled technologies in migration contexts, including, but not limited to, a ban on remote biometric identification and categorization in public spaces, including in border and migration control settings. Question 2, what are the potential structural harms that the deployment of a neurotechnology could cause? Meaning, for example, in the case again of biometric technologies in the workplace, have the consequences of concentrating power in the hands of those who control capital to be wielded over those who provide labor being considered? This is particularly important to note, given the fact that intrusive technologies often reach the public sector after having been introduced and normalized through commercial spaces, such as the workplace, meaning that they are important sites of focus when constructing calls for bans or moratoriums. Question 3, the big question. Have we learned from previous mistakes? How do we ensure that the global North and the global South are equally represented and protected and above all consulted? I mean, we all know that with the Brussels effect, the much discussed Brussels effect, which I've looked at in the past and generally see as a positive move, but at the same time, a lot of these laws are not suited to the local contexts. So you have places which don't have rule of law, just simply copying and pasting, for example, the GDPR, and that can have unforeseen results in some developing states. So question 4, how can we involve the public earlier? I mean, ultimately, there needs to be a much wider public consultation when we're discussing not only regulation, but how these technologies are allowed to develop. In other words, at design stages, at development stages, and certainly before deployment. So just to conclude, we need proper consultation, risk assessment for the development of neurotechnology. In other words, we need to look beyond what the technology is or what it claims to do, and consider how it will be used or abused, who will have a vested interest in the data, where will the data come from, and who it's likely to hurt most. What we need is therefore an approach for responsible technology, towards technology that does not harm. A potentially useful guide is the OECD's 2019 adopted recommendation of responsible innovation in neurotechnology, which embodies a number of principles. It aims to guide governments and innovators to anticipate and address the ethical, legal, and societal challenges raised by novel neurotechnologies, whilst also promoting investment in the field.
Thank you very much, Mark. I think that your intervention was excellent in creating new questions for the panel, and I saw a lot of people here already nodding actively. So perhaps before we move on to new questions, I wanted to hear if there's any immediate reactions or any immediate responses that you would like to give to the other panelists' remarks.
Yeah. Thank you. I think it has been very interesting to listen to all of you, because you look at the issue from different perspectives, from the perspective of promotion of these technologies, from the perspective of institutionally looking at it, and from the perspective of protecting rights. And so the vision, for example, that the Spanish presidency has on this is that it is not only about protecting, it is also about promoting. I mean, technologies, all these technologies, there will be an international race on these technologies, as there will be one on quantum, as there will be one on any other technology that comes forward. And the European Union, our countries, our member states need to be competitive and need to enter in this race in the moment that it has to enter, and not late, but also always with our vision or our focus, which is human-centric, rights-oriented, and embedded in how we produce this technology. And in this regard, I think it has been said here by the videos, but we need to distinguish between invasive and non-invasive. So invasive neurotechnologies, they are somehow, let's say, I wouldn't say regulated, but they are taken care of in hospitals by bioethical committees. So all the examples that Mr. Kleiner mentioned about the Human Brain Project, when they are inside a brain or inside a body, then they are somehow looked at and the possible implications that this technology have. But the problem is that there is technology, neurotechnology that is non-invasive that you can buy on Amazon and that you can put it yourself, like the diadema of Elon Musk, and then that person, or that company gets harvests the data continuously to a data center in wherever his data centers are, and it gets an incredible accumulation of data and power that can then impact on how you think, how you vote, or what you buy. Because one example that it was not mentioned here by, or maybe I think it was not mentioned, but is that they made an experiment in Dr. Juste's laboratory with a mouse, and the mouse was taught to sip some water when it saw horizontal lines, and not to sip water when it saw vertical lines. And then with neurotechnologies, it delivers some impulses, electrical impulses, to the brain of the mouse, and then it started. The impulses taught the mouse to drink water when there were vertical lines and not horizontal. So it changed the way the mouse was thinking. And this, I mean, let's look at the risk that it can happen if all of us could be manipulated in our brain and how we think and how we do it. I mean, this information, it will just be a joke. I mean, social media is nothing in compared with the risk that we have. And it's not that we need to directly regulate. That's not the issue. The issue is that the conversation is international. There is a UNESCO process that is started now on a possible recommendation on ethics of neurotechnologies. There is a lot of work being done in the Council of Europe on this matter. There is a recommendation at the OECD, and Spain saw that we are having a lot of projects, a lot of investment, but we are not having this debate here at the European Union, and we need to start talking about it. And then if we realize that, I mean, GDPR covers it effectively, then okay, then we understand it. But we need to understand whether it does cover it with existing regulation, or we need to look at something else. But not always with the approach, and I think it has been very useful. We will test it with time whether the approach on AI it works fully or not, because nobody has the crystal ball of how to do policy making here. But it's promotion and protection. I mean, we need to be competitive, but with our ethical standpoint. And this is what the Spanish presidency wants to get into this discussion. Put forward some kind of reflection, not only at the member states level, but also in the Brussels bubble, with NGOs, with companies, with researchers, so that we start thinking about it, because we are on time to be competitive, but also to be protective of the rights of the people.
Thank you very much. Okay, but before you come, I will pick up a couple of points here, but then I will give the floor to Paul Nemitz, who has managed to connect, and I'm sure he also wants to speak about it. But first, Mark, really quick, and then Thibaut.
I think it's a more provocative question. I mean, Europe has produced excellent regulations. They've been imitated, for want of a better word, outside of the EU. The question is always going to come down to enforcement. So if I was to be provocative, you have Musk coming out today and saying, I'm firing my election integrity team. They are supposed to be abiding by the DSA. The EU, by right, should come out and say, we're shutting you down. Like this is multiple occasions when we're entering a year where there's going to be 64 elections. And I know I'm being provocative here, but it's just a thought that it's all very well promoting innovation, parallel producing good regulation. But if it isn't enforced proactively, it's not worth the paper it's written on. And the EU, from a credibility standpoint, needs to make sure it enforces. And of course, Thibaut, they've put in mechanisms where there's European oversight. And I say that as an Irish person, because enforcement has been incredibly poor in Ireland. I mean, if anything, we've undermined the GDPR by not enforcing it. Provocation.
No, but at first I will react to this because I think you're totally right. I mean, there's no point having a brilliant regulation that you don't enforce. But I can tell you that as far as the Commission is concerned, I mean, we are in the middle of enforcing the Digital Services Act, Digital Markets Act, and clearly, I mean, you know, we are keeping a close eye on what is happening around the platforms that have been designated as gatekeepers, and I can tell you that we have a habit also of imposing fines on people who don't abide by the rule. And I mean, in Ireland, if you look at the recent decision on Meta, you know, more than 300 million euros fine. I think this is a real deterrent, and I think that these companies know it's not good also for their brand if they deceive their own customers. So I think I fully agree with you, but I think, you know, there is also a willingness from the EU to walk the talk, I would say, because otherwise, you know, we cannot claim that we are engaged in this leadership in terms of making the digital transformation really human-centric and positive for our people. But very quickly, I think Paul is also waiting. I wanted to say that I'm a little bit reassured by also the discussion so far. In a way, I think we still seem to converge that there are aspects to promote, but also we need to start the conversation. What I also heard from you, Trinidad, was that you linked very much this Neurorights with human dignity, which in the EU is a fundamental right. So in a way, you know, we can tick the box already. Similarly, on what you were mentioning, Mark, I mean, all these elements are actually things we address in the AI Act. So I think that if we fix it through the AI Act, we would do a great deal of what you are saying. And about evolving Latin America, Caribbeans, and the Global South, I think this is essential if we want also the EU to be credible internationally. But I think we are much more committed to this than other regions that just ask, you know, 5, 6 large companies to design code of conducts, and they think the job is done. I think we have a different approach, and I think the Spanish presidency has been also highlighting that with the many, you know, discussions you had, all in particular with Latin America.
Thank you very much, Thibaut. And I would like to see if Paul Nemitz, Principal Advisor for the Digital Transformation at DigiJust, can come in, because I know he also has a point.
Thank you, and good morning to everyone. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Okay, I'm sorry, something doesn't work with the video, but doesn't matter. Just a few remarks, and of course we look to DG Connect and Thibaut's people to do the technology screening and foresight. It is very important that we in the Commission all together understand the new technologies on the horizon. And of course, DigiJust, we alone cannot do it. And so therefore, I totally agree that making people aware and having a discussion like the one today is vital. This being said, I think in times of fast-moving technological innovation, we have to get used to the fact that we cannot have for every new technology a new law. So I would say that we must make the most of what I would call technology neutral legislation, meaning legal rules which are formulated in such a way that they keep their relevance and have relevance also for the next technology and the next business model. And here I would like to recall that you know, this idea that the law has to move as fast as the code, and actually the software and the code and technological movement are the better tools, is actually wrong, because, you know, software and code is written for stupids. Who are the stupids? The stupids are the computers. They cannot think for themselves. While the law in human language is written for humans who can think for themselves, and therefore a well-written, technology-neutrally written law can be reinterpreted when a new technology comes on the horizon. And I think we are here in the perfect case in point. You know, let's have a look together with the data protection authorities who are called upon to apply a GDPR, how far the issues you are debating, the data from brains, is actually not covered. I, as the lead director at the time when making the GDPR, I can tell you my view of the law, and by the way, not only of GDPR, but also of our Charter of Fundamental Rights and many other fundamental rights catalogs in this world. The view of the human in constitutional law, and certainly also in GDPR, is holistic and all-encompassing. So the idea that the brain and what comes out of the brain is produced in the brain, and the freedom of thought and so on is not covered, is completely à côté de la plaque, I would say, at least for Europe. If we have to be conscious that if we put ourselves into a position which is that every new technology needs a new law because old law doesn't cover things, we devalue the protections which we already have in our constitutional text, in particular, of course, the protection of the human body, the protection of freedom, of self-determination, and, if you want to go narrower, of personal data. So I think as much as it is important to raise awareness and have these discussions, let's not jump too quickly to say we need a new law. Let's make a proper legal gap analysis. And a final remark on the relationship between technology marketing and what we are doing in politics. I think we have to be a little bit careful that politics is neither made a marketing tool by inciting, every time some fad comes up in technology, we have to do a communication on it, which also has a marketing function. And on the other hand, of course, we have to be careful that we are not reduced to just product improvement and optimization legislation. What I must say, one could think we are being reduced to when we talk about risk-based regulation. The ambition of democracy and of the rule of law is much broader. Democracy wants to shape the world in which we live, and it's certainly not only legitimate to do risk-based legislation. I think our attitude towards the law has to return to recognizing that the law is the most noble expression of democracy. It's the most noble speaking act. It's nothing bad. It's not just an innovation obstacle and a problem, and let's be careful about it. The law is a good thing, and it's certainly not only a risk-based law, which we need. We need democracy to shape our lives. So many of our tech discussions today are actually also about the primacy of democracy and the rule of law over technology and business models. And so I just wanted to share those remarks with you because we are moving into a new mandate of the Commission, and we all look, of course, for new possibilities of, good ideas, what we should be doing. And I think we have to keep a different balance also alongside the classic balance of, wanting to be competitive on the one hand and maintain our values on the other. And I would say that is the balance between reconfirming that the laws which we have are good, and good laws cover many things which have been not foreseen at the time when they were created. In fact, constitutional law is the law which covers most of those things, because constitutional law is in place often, for not only for decades, but for centuries. And this great ability of the law and of human language, I think we also have to promote that in our discussions of new technology. Let's please not create the impression that Silicon Valley is right when it says, every new technology, you have to move fast with the law. I really don't think that's good for democracy to, let's say, be in this spirit. And I'm happy about the discussion today, because also I don't see this tendency in this discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Now I can see that we have some immediate reactions here on the table. So perhaps Trinidad first, and I know that Alberto, you also wanted to come next. And
thank you. So yes, I fully agree that to give too much focus on legislation, on passing laws, is not the. It depends on where on the process you are, on discussing, on understanding really what the implications are. In our case, we have been working on this for the past 3 years. In other cases, that discussion may be starting, and I do think this is a matter of democracy. Many of you have said, what are the implications? As you, Alberto, said, what about those non-invasive devices that in Chile we have had the discussion, for instance? What about the protection of fundamental rights of boys, girls, and adolescents playing with specific games created by private companies where maybe our values will not be the same? And those are having impact. There are investigations that have proven that they have impact in neuroplasticity. That means in the ability of brain to rewire and continue to adapt to different circumstances. So yes, first is a conversation of what we value as democracies. And that's why we see as this is a very important, what we have as a national process is ours. But our national process may be very good, but it will not be worthwhile if we as a global community don't get together and really agree what we want to say to all stakeholders, everyone, including companies, what we would like to see neurotechnologies advance towards. And in our specific case, coming from a middle-income country, Latin America, and you may have this issue as well here in Europe. What about countries in which you don't have such institutional strength to really enforce whatever code of conduct, standard, law, whatever you choose to regulate this technology with? So there is when democracy is so important, and engagement with different stakeholders, not just governments, is key. And then the second point to this is we, for Chile and in many countries, which by the way, it's the majority, the vast majority of the countries in the world, what will happen in the future when we don't have alternatives of suppliers of products and services to go to provide ourselves with these very much needed technologies?
thank you very much for opening the floor to questions such as like responsibility in governance where, because as you mentioned, like perhaps here in Europe, we are very used to trying to see what does the EU have to do vis-a-vis like certain advancement, but like having like you, for example, today on the table is like really helpful, I think, like personally for me to understand that perhaps some issues do not require necessarily like regional governance, but perhaps there is also responsibility towards creating like global governance frameworks, and what else do we need in order to make those frameworks applicable in other jurisdictions that, as you mentioned, and I think this is a point that has been raised several times already today, may not enjoy the guarantees, for example, that we are enjoying right now in Europe when it comes to democracy or rule of law. I don't want to monopolize the floor, and I know that Alberto really wanted to come, but that's like something that I thought it could be, should be like raised again.
Yes, no, I think it was very interesting what Paul mentioned, and I thank him for bringing his view as well on how laws could also already cover this. But let me point out one thing, because it's neurotechnologies is not like any other emerging technology that you may have. I mean, quantum computing, for example, quantum technology, if we get into, I mean, you know more than me, but it may put a risk on privacy, and then you will need to find you know, new technologies that like post-quantum encryption or whatever, so to ensure that your right to privacy is protected. But in here, neurotechnologies are messing with an organ of our bodies that we understand at 10% of it, and companies will understand much more than maybe researchers, or maybe and how to manipulate people, because they are doing they are harvesting such data. And it's not a matter of only companies, or it's not a matter of creating a new law specifically for neurotechnologies. It's a matter of reflecting whether any of the existing laws may need to be updated with an extra protection on this or there for this particular type of data that is so, I mean, it's the philosophical nature of our bodies that we don't understand ourselves, and we cannot just you know, treat them like data from our Fitbit or wearables or whatever. It's simply not the same. And to put an example, there was a study that the foundation of Dr. Juste carried out, in which 13 companies in the US that are developing, the US and Canada, I think, that are developing neurotechnologies, they were asking for consent to use their data to the people that were using the, you know, the non-invasive devices, and all of the 13 companies received the consent of all the people that were using this. And then they not only they consented to give the data to the company, but they consented to give it to third-party providers. And this is an issue that is happening. I mean, might not be to update the law, okay, might be more education, awareness raising, I don't know. But this is a conversation that is there. I mean, maybe in Europe, we are a bit more conscious about data privacy and so on and so forth. But I mean, in the US, you see this happening, and you know, and nobody really is shocked. So I think the conversation is necessary, and we need to then the way that how we do it, legally or not legally or whatever, then it's or maybe with case law, I don't know, maybe it's a matter of bringing you know, something to the Court of Justice, and then they to give an opinion on how this is interpreted with brain data or neuro data. Then okay, but the conversation needs to be there, needs to happen, and it's not any new technology. It's a particular technology that looks at the very basic thing of human beings.
I just wanted to also comment, because I mean, it's always nice to listen to Paul, who I think is making extremely valid points. But I would also agree to what you just said in a way that there is somehow also a need to make the digital technologies and the enforcement of these fundamental laws something that is doable. And in a way, even though, you know, I think we can all be proud about the GDPR in the EU, we should also recognize that it has been extremely complicated for SMEs, for instance, to implement it. And I think, to go back to what we were saying earlier, I mean, implementation at the end of the day is super important. And that's why we also in the EU, we have this declaration on digital rights and principles. We had exactly this conversation with the legislator. Why do you need that if you have you know, the Charter of Human Rights? The reason we thought we need it is because there is so much distance between these almost eternal ground principles and the day-to-day implementation of them, that you need to translate how these fundamental rights then apply and what they mean also in concrete terms. And that's what I think that's why also legislations that are risk-based are super important, because they make it possible for the fundamental rights, for the constitutional elements to be actually translated into practical steps that then the corporations, the governments can really use to enforce these very big principles. So education is super important, because if you have consent but nobody is saying no, I mean, what's the point? But at the same time, you know, abilities to enforce by the legislator, because we have something a bit more specific. So it could be case law, it could be also secondary law, as we have in the EU. I think it's essential, because otherwise we miss the point. And I just wanted to point out also on the risk you mentioned, this non-invasive devices and so on. This was really an important point also on the DSA and the DMA. I mean, we have now prohibited dark patterns from social media. This is something that already is possible, without neuro devices. That just in the way a website is asking you a few things, you can actually be manipulated. It is happening today with less advanced technology, and we said clearly in the EU, we don't want this. We want people to be aware of their decisions, and we want, I think, this kind of principles to be also valid for emerging new tech that maybe we don't know all about.
Yeah, I mean, very quickly, yeah, Paul, absolutely. I mean, you don't want constant new legislation. It is difficult enough as it is to understand how they all interact with each other in the first place. But I think what we haven't touched upon, which probably opens another can of worms, is the business model situation. So when you have business models which are purely based on data harvesting, and then revenue for digital advertising, there's a misalignment of incentives. And I think the DMA, to some degree, wants to wean companies off that reliance. But ultimately, it's still very much this misalignment, which is going to cause issues as we move ahead. I mean, for example, if you think of Neurotechnologies, they're going to be completely reliant on data harvesting. But at the same time, we're trying to balance fundamental rights by having consent and by asking people to be judicious about what data they let go. But if that's the case, you will get certain technologies which won't be sustainable financially because of this misalignment of incentives. So these are the kind of things that ultimately will be questions that will need to be answered over the next years as we try and make it a more competitive marketplace, or at least open up the competition. And then that brings in interoperability, et cetera, et cetera.
That's what you mentioned. It's quite interesting, the misalignment and the business model, and we see, like, for example, in your virtual worlds communication that you published, the future. I mean, the non-invasive neurotechnologies. The future of these technologies is the business model that relates to the sector of education and entertainment. And when we enter in a virtual world, now we are doing with the glasses, for example, well, or we are trying to do it. We will ask the companies that are developing it how we are with that. But in the future, it might be with diademas that you get impulses to feel what happens in the virtual world. And I mean, we need to promote this in terms of like the business productivity of the sector and so on and so forth. But we need to also be aware that the business model needs to change from commercializing with data of people to commercializing with experiences. I mean, you sell an experience, but and that's maybe your business model. You don't sell the intimacies or the data that talks about you or your dignity and so on. And in this, I mean. I'm going to do a bit of publicity here of Spain. Allow me, please, if you don't mind. But we are in Spain funding one center which is called Spain Neurotech with 200 million euros for 15 years in order to do a lot of research on neurotechnologies for degenerative diseases and so on, but also to promote the startups, to find out new business models that can be replicable and useful and competitive in a new way of using neurotechnology. So that I mean, I think maybe we need to go towards that area. How to exploit the business model away from selling the person, but selling other stuff. No. Sorry.
So if I can just pick up like some of the points that we have been hearing in the last interventions, to me is like really interesting to see how at the beginning of the conversation it was more about exploring like what are the specific challenges and whether or not we need like specific tools to address these specific challenges of neurotechnology, and how the conversation has been moving to perhaps it's not about one specific tool that we need to do. Like there were questions about technology neutral regulation, a lot of claims around like risk based regulation and like different neurotechnologies, whether it's invasive, not invasive, the frameworks that are existent. And to me, it's like really interesting to see how the conversation is now going to competition. And I wanted to come back to perhaps a point that was raised before that I could summarize in this way, like, this is an industry that is like booming because of, for example, at the beginning, Dr. Eustace said there was a lot of investment from the Obama administration on, and this has generated this this new like industry of neurotechnology that is right now mostly in the US. So we should enter this race, and the word race has come up, because if we don't do it, others are going to do it, and therefore we will have to just like go and buy these products and whatever comes with it, which is another point that Trinidad has also raised, which was particularly, let's say, like damaging for the interest of like perhaps like countries that are like less developed, or they're like middle income countries as well as Chile. So perhaps I would like to make the panel reflect about like whether are we going in the right direction? Because one of the questions that I asked you before coming here today is like, have we learned from our past mistakes? What are the lessons that perhaps we can take from AI regulation and the way we have approached AI? Because right now we're just like, yeah, this is promising, we can move forward with it. And I think that that's like another question that we should be having, another reflection to have. But if we continue, if we keep moving with, like, for example, Spain Neurotech to 100 million, right now, well, in 2 days, tomorrow is the conclusion of the Human Brain Project. You mentioned 30th of September. So what's next?
Have we learned from past mistakes? I mean, I think the fact that, as a reference before, that they're putting in a European level governance mechanism in the DSA and the DMA, and they're directly regulating gatekeepers, I think that is a lessons learned from what didn't happen under the GDPR. So I think that's progress. But I think Thibaut would be able to elaborate much more on that, but as one example of lessons being learned.
I'm called to say something. No. I think your question is spot on, and I also made the same point as you, Trinidad, that if we don't develop technologies that match our values, then it's also our problem if we simply have to import those from other regions that we don't like. So that's why it's so important not to let go. And sometimes these days I hear people saying, large language models, are already advanced in some countries or by some US companies. So let's just focus on something else. I don't think that's the right answer, because first of all, AI technology and large language models is just in its infancy. And secondly, we simply cannot afford not to have something that is likely to be everywhere, used across industries and so on. So I think that we need to make sure that also in the EU and together with other partners, we have a minimum level of, I would not use the term strategic autonomy, but something that goes in this direction of, to have sovereignty on some of the core building blocks of our society in terms of technological development. And I think, unfortunately, this is something that requires a lot of money. And in the EU, we are in a situation where, I mentioned the Brain Project. I think it was the largest public endeavor, actually, worldwide, with more than 600 million euros. So we still are investing. Horizon Europe is still the biggest research program worldwide with 900 million euros over 7 years. But it's not enough. If you look at the size of the tech giants in China, in the EU, they have huge research budgets. And I think what I'm frustrated regularly at the moment is that we see our large companies in Europe being basically too passive towards innovation and technological development. They seem to be, very risk averse compared to other competitors. That's not going to work if they just wait for regulation or for governments to save their skin. I think it's going too fast, and basically our public resources are drying up. The EU budget at the moment is being discussed. We have tremendous problems to even get funding for Ukraine, which should be a no-brainer. So let alone having top-ups for the like of Digital Europe, Horizon Europe, and the like, which I think we need because the magnitude of the challenge is very, very big. So if I had a plea, it would be to say, yes, let's invest. Let's make sure that we put this technology at the forefront, because one day maybe this scenario that you were pointing out could happen, and you just have to rely on somebody else's technology, and this will be our fault.
Maybe?
I think it's a very difficult question, to be honest, to answer. Have we learned from our past mistakes? I think to be honest, working on these issues, in my personal experience, I feel super overwhelmed, and I have had these discussions with colleagues of mine. I'm a diplomat. I'm supposed to know many things about different things, and engage in negotiations with people like in this table who are experts in topics. And we have the challenge to steer and represent our countries in global conversations, while these technologies are advancing at a speed that we are not seeing. So I would say that in that scenario, I am very confident with what Chile is doing in terms of stripping down the problem, taking away the what we don't know and we won't be able to know about specific routes the technology, its development will take. And let's say, so let's strip down the issue, and let's begin by sitting down with our region, sitting down with global partners, and talk about definitions, like the most basic thing. Sit in a table and let's share. Are we, when we talk about neurotechnology, are we understanding the same thing? Are we picturing the same processes, the same methods? Are we really having a common understanding that these may have a different impact depending on not just development of countries, but it will have a different impact in me as an adult than in senior population, than in kids, like generations that will be born to a world where neurotechnology it's a thing, like a normal thing. So.
Thank you very much. I can see that Paul has raised his hand.
Yes, on the question of lessons learned, first of all, I agree with everything Thibaut said. And I think it's also important that we become better in bringing the European players to the table. You know, the American players, they have endless money. They are in Brussels with huge offices. You know, there's let's say, sometimes maybe too much friendship with all these guys from these offices and the parties they throw and so on, you know. So I think it's also a job for the Commission to spend money on seeking out the smaller players, which, you know, Europe is big, which may be somewhere of which we don't know yet, and to bring them to the table for discussions in Brussels. The second point is, I think we are in danger of falling prey to a very American lobbying tactic, which is to say, yeah, substantive rules are good, you know, let's have a law, but no private right of action. You know, when I hear you saying enforcement is important, let's be clear about what this means in practice. In practice, this means that those called upon to enforce, the civil servants, must be conscious that they can not only be taken to court if they take a hard decision, namely by the operator, the company which may have done something wrong, but they must also be conscious that if they do nothing and if they just have a coffee with the company doing a job, they can be taken to court by civil society or people. So we must always have this even-handedness, rights of action, of course, of defense of those who are subject to, let's say, a fine or another type of sanction, but also rights of action of citizens and civil society who seek enforcement of the law, which protects their rights, but also in the public interest. And I think there in Brussels, we have to just generalize this practice. We need these rights of actions on both sides, because otherwise enforcement doesn't work. We have the experience of the directive which preceded GDPR, and there the authorities had too broad discretion whether to follow up complaints of citizens or not. And there basically was no litigation, because they always agreed with the controllers on what they should change, have a nice coffee, women, gentlemen culture. That has now changed. Now human people have a right, and civil society also, that complaints are followed up. DPAs must follow up. If they don't follow up, they can be taken to court, and successfully. And I think that should be a model in every type of technology regulation we do in the future. Now, following on from this, if one means it with enforcement, well, then also we have to bring the enforcers to the table of the discussion. And I would say, for example, this discussion on Neurorights, the DPAs should be there, and I would even say it should be us who takes it, and I will try my best to do this, to take this to the DPAs, because all the examples you have described about all the data, the children and all the data this, all the data that, well, the DPAs should take charge of this. The DPAs actually have their own foresight group called, by coincidence, the Berlin Group, which is actually a global group, not just DPAs from Europe, but worldwide. They should take charge of this and enforce where you already see today or see in the future that, for example, people are being drained of their brain data. And then the last point, I think in the debate about technology, we are very dependent on what the technology companies actually tell us. And like the German car industry has lied about the exhausts, unfortunately, we have a culture of lying in particular, the big tech, when they talk to the legislator or enforcer. So when it is about enforcement in competition law, for example, we have tools to sanction lying, and we have done this. We have imposed a fine, let's say, for example, of 120 million on Facebook because they didn't tell the full story in the takeover of WhatsApp. But we have no tool whatsoever to hold big tech, which comes out with these new technologies, to tell us the truth when the Commission is seeking input for policy making, or for that matter, and that is even worse, when the Parliament is deliberating legislation. So I would say one of the lessons learned for the future must be, if it is true that this technology, and it's not only about the technology we're discussing today, becomes more and more important in our life, and I think that's a fact. And if it's true that policymaking only works together with input from the tech world, then we must find ways to make sure that the input we are getting as Commission, monopoly of initiative, after all, and a fortiori the democratic lawmaker, that the input we are getting is the truth. And I hope we can work on all on this in the next mandate. I think that's a key thing about lessons learned.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Now it works. Yeah, I think I'm going to put a positive outlook as well on lessons learned, because I think we have learned We are learning a lot, not only at European level, but also at national level. I will bring back the Spain Neurotech initiative. I mean, it's 200 million euros, but it's the only one in the world. There are 5 of this type in the world, but it's the only one in the world that is ethical by design. So we have a section of that to study how to put ethics and rights into the development of this technology. And this, I mean, praise to what it delivers to the European Commission, no? That you know, this is the human-centric narrative ambition. At the end of the day, it translates into national initiatives, and well, let's see if this makes Spain much more competitive on this new technology in the global race. And I also would like to say that I mean, let me speak on validating the approach of the Commission to ethics. So, for example, I mean, okay, the financing resources of the Commission might be going down, but the European Digital Infrastructure Consortium is a new entity that has been created with the Digital Policy Program that allow member states to get together and create a new thing and put investment there because they want to, you know, to get this particular technology forward in a cooperation between a few countries. And this is key because we don't have to be, all the countries of the member states don't have to be the best in all technologies. Maybe we need to go for specialization of this kind, and that the Commission has put forward this new system in which we can cooperate and be competitive in the future, I think is key and very important. And I think we are learning in many ways.
Thank you very much. I would like to make a very last question to the panel, which is there something else you would like to add? Because otherwise, my intention would be to close up and open for questions.
I think this kind of, you mentioned competitiveness, Thibaut. I think that's obviously a discussion for another day in a way, but it is, I suppose, good to see Mario Draghi come to save the day as the new sort of competitiveness czar. He's going to do some report, according to von der Leyen's latest speech. But again, competitiveness will only really be enhanced when access to capital in the form of the CMU is working, because you still have a lot of European companies, small, going to the US to raise capital, establishing themselves there, and then not coming back. And this goes into the whole discussion about why can't we build big companies in Europe like they have in the US. And we're now in a situation where, for example, 4 billion was pledged by AWS to Anthropic the other day to raise new generative AI solutions. I mean, we just can't compete with that. And it makes it extremely difficult because again, it's just private capital going into private capital, and then they develop something and they dominate. But yeah, just a final thought, really. I think that's positive. I'm not sure.
Well, thank you very much. Then I would like to say a couple of things. First, one of my personal conclusions are, because I am in this privileged position of being a moderator, which is really nice because I get to learn new things, but also like capture new thoughts. So in this sense, I think that one of the first conclusions that I take from this conversation is that what do we do with this? And when it comes to this, I think that we have learned from different experiences that there is many ways that we can deal with this new challenge, which will be repeated over time with new technologies to come. There's like certain like hard approaches, which is like regulation, such as what Chile has done, and I'm again grateful that Trinidad, you decided to join us today for this debate. There are like perhaps other soft approaches, such as the issue of code conducts from big tech companies that all of a sudden everybody clicks in terms and conditions. And as a digital policy person at the EPC, I'm very, very familiar with what the implications are. And I'm speaking in sarcasm because I know that this is something that for all the people here would echo. There is like other approaches that we could take, such as like it has been mentioned, the issue of like, how about we go to case law? How about we use our current frameworks and we just like update them? There was like also mentions of we cannot make one regulation per new challenge that comes. There has been like questions about like what we need is like more like risk-based technology neutral regulations that we can adapt to emerging challenges. Another interesting conclusion that I have taken is that when we approach this challenge of newer technologies, perhaps we have like different scenarios that we picture in our minds. So international collaboration is interesting to see, to ask ourselves, what do we want and what is the scenario that we would never want to have? And are we thinking about the risks in a similar fashion? And not only that, like when we speak about neurotechnologies, are we speaking about invasive and not invasive? And to me, it was really shocking to hear that you can buy these things on Amazon. So I'll be very like, I'll keep an eye on my algorithm just in case. And in that case, how do we use what we have already in place? So bioethical committees, what like the procedures and protocols already happening in hospitals. But what about the technologies that, as you, Alberto, mentioned, already commercially available? And what, how do we protect, like perhaps other parts of the population? How about it is a 15-year-old, the one who buys this, and then what are the implications of this, right? So with this, I would like to open the floor for questions. Just like a little remark for those who made the trip, we're going to have like food next door. So unless you have to run, I would like very much encourage you to stay over.
Thanks. It was very interesting. STOA, the Scientific Foresight Unit in European Parliament. I just wanted to. It was very pragmatic and very down to legislation. They just since I'm also dealing with this topic for some time, I wanted to draw your attention to something very specific about neurotechnologies. So when you record the neural data, it's also reflects unconscious processes. So basically, as many people say, we are having a danger of a machine in the future knowing more about you as you know about yourself. Yeah. And I think that all the legislative process is also, let's say, working towards protecting us sometimes from ourselves. So I think that with this Neurorights, and it's true that we don't need maybe to invent new things, but maybe we can update the rights we already have. And then just a philosophical question, what to do with the unconscious self of ours? Because now, for the first time, this unconscious self will have a voice. And then do we need to have this additional voice or not? And so on and so on. But just using Mr. Kleiner example, I just also want to advertise. We will have a Neurorights event in the Parliament as well in November 16th, so stay tuned. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Perhaps we pick another question, and then I'll give the floor to the panelists for responses.
Hi, thank you. My name is Ferdinand Ferroli. I'm working for an NGO on digital rights, Identity Valley, and we have talked a lot about law and case law and legislation. I think something that we have not talked about a lot is the side of basically the consumer. I just remember that Mr. Gago said they had these studies in basically where everybody, like 13 studies, everybody just said, yes, they consented to everything, giving away the data. And this is a common pattern. This is in Europe the same. Basically, people, you can go a long way with clicking consent, basically. So in some way, we have rights, but we need to make them also enforceable in a personal way. What I'm getting at is that how can we, beside from the legislation part, how can we steer society and consumers a bit more into the direction to have a demand for responsible technology as well? And that's why I'm thinking we're not by coincidence we're talking about the twin transition, the basically the climate and the digital transition, because we have found very good ways, or at least very possibly potentially good ways to steer the market and consumers into a direction where CO2 is really reduced. Let's think about the certificates market and the green taxonomy. I think we should maybe, and this is something that I would like for you to reflect on, to go into a direction where we have something like this on in a digital world, to say, how can we steer the market into a direction and also consumers into a direction where these technologies are at least developed? Because if I'm a consumer, I go to the App Store and I find just the big ones. And if I want to find something that is responsible, I stand there and there is nothing. So I think this is something that we also have to think about. How can we make consumers pick up demand and also steer investments into these technologies as well?
Who wants to respond? Paul, I can see that you have your hand up.
It was from a previous discussion, but a very quick answer here. I think it's true that the experience of environmental law since the 90s is very informative for us in Europe, because the greening of the economy in Europe, and later followed by the famous slogan of the greening of GE in America, this greening story is a story of combining economic growth and making business more efficient because of resource efficiency. Greening is largely also a resource efficiency, together with doing something against climate change and environmental pollution. So I think it's true that in environmental law, there is a lot of learning for tech policy making.
So to quickly react to your question, of course, this will open up a great deal of information that it is there and we don't know it's there. In the case of Chile, we acknowledge that, and that's why at the constitutional reform, we not only included the right to protect the rights of the brain, but also the information derived from activities from the brain. One of the, you can say there are many rights involved in the development of these technologies, but from our perspective, one of the three main rights that could be at risk and it's needed to protect, it's the right to privacy. The right to privacy to the information that you know you have and the one that you don't know you have. And in the case of consumers, society, we do agree it's very important. But this is a fairly new topic, and the discussions are really just starting. In our case, the Senate has done a great job since 2020 in opening up spaces where students, academia, research centers, Senate, government officials get together in the challenges of the future events that happen, the main one once a year, to discuss these and other topics. But as you say, as the discussion is officially beginning, and it is in different stages in different parts of the world, we really need to be very conscious in the different processes happening to engage people, because people is actually giving consent not only in these very frontier technologies, but also in technologies that have existed for a long while now.
Yeah, but I mean, if I may just quickly, I can reassure you that most of these consents today are invalid under GDPR in Europe, because the fact that someone clicks and says it's consent doesn't make this a valid consent. The consent must be free and informed. And it was very nice, like you just said, if people don't know what they are giving away, this is not an informed consent, so it's not valid. And we have a lot of invalid consent around, and we have a tradition in Europe also in the general terms of contract legislation, which, by the way, I think we could also extend more into technology-based issues, where it really doesn't matter what type of contract you have signed up. All the small print may be completely invalid, and a judge will throw it in the dustbin if it is, you know, unreasonable in light of your interests as an average consumer. So I would agree with those who say we cannot leave alone the individuals in confronting these large tech corporations and these large systems, which they anyway don't understand. And our law doesn't leave them alone. The problem is that many people are not aware of this. And of course, there is an issue of enforcement, in the sense that if you're not aware you're being screwed and that you have rights against this, you don't bring an action. Many people don't realize that even once they have clicked consent afterwards, they still have rights. They could, do a lot, and they don't do it. So we have here also an issue of, let's say, public education in parallel to having more ex officio enforcement by the enforcers.
Yeah, I was actually going to come exactly to this because in a way, I mean, the beauty of democracy is also that people have the right to be stupid. They have the right to lie. They have the right to vote for Donald Trump and so on. And this is fine as long as this is based also on the correct information. And one of the key challenges we actually identified in the EU, and I would invite you, if you have the chance to read our very recent report on the state of the digital decade, where we look at precisely where we are in terms of key indicators for 2030. The most worrying area of our 4-axis compact is actually on skills, where we see that by and large, even basic skills are very far from our target of 80% of the population. And if people don't have basic digital skills, no surprise that when confronted with the issue about consent, they just want to get the service. They don't realize exactly what is happening. And I think that what Paul was saying is totally correct, but I think that people are not even aware of even more basic elements. And this is really the biggest challenge, because not only on basic skills, but also on advanced skills, today there is no chance we reach the target of 20 million ICT experts unless there is a massive effort at all levels in the EU. And I think really this is something that is worrying, because if we don't have the talent, if we don't have the basic skills, forget it about being really in control of this very rapid technological development. So I just wanted to flag this because we see it as a major risk for the EU going forward.
Just a very quick reaction. I know, Mark, no, you're fine? Because otherwise I would open again the floor for questions.
Just to agree, and I think the usual question is like, how do you get people to value their data? That's basically the fundamental question. That's
I know we have more questions here, so maybe we'll pick the last round of questions, and then we will proceed to just having some tapas next door.
Hello, everyone. I'm Maria with the new think tank, the International Center for Future Generations here in Brussels. We look to understand and help decision makers approach emerging technologies like neurotech. I have a question to pick a few of the threads, and specifically looking at, we're sort of at a turning point. We have very good laws that have been passed and that are being passed. And we have a nonstop onslaught of emerging technologies. And I've heard a bit about, of course, the role of implementation. Law is no good if it can't be implemented. And poking specifically at, I know, Paul, you mentioned the data protection authorities. And you mentioned their foresight capabilities, the Berlin group. I wonder, also connecting to the question of what lessons have we learned, how are data protection authorities empowered and connected to look at hindsight, to really take stock continuously, not just in their own jurisdictions, but together, and also with wider group of stakeholders, to understand, as this technology is evolving, how we need to adapt our own legal frameworks and our own abilities to enforce.
Is there another question in the room so we can pick another one, or we just go with the answers? This is the last chance, people. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm working with Paul at DigiJust. Actually, I'm Martin Saclay. I'm working at the Fundamental Rights Policy Unit. So first, thank you very much for this event, because we are very starting the discussion at the European level, and we need to get at the table with every actor. So from the tech experts of Connect, the fundamental rights experts from GD Just for the Commission, the Council of the Parliament, and of course stakeholders and the civil societies organization to answer. Maybe also on my side, the previous questions. I think we are working well with data protection authorities, and they are also well aware of this within the European Data Protection Board at the European level. This is, for example, what they've done with, if we are taking the example of AI, the investigation they have launched on generative AI recently. On the other side, we also must think about consumer issues and not only data protection issues. And that's why we have to involve the CPC network, for example, so the consumers also authorities. We know less about this, but they are also involved on, for example, emerging technologies and the development of AI. And they are also currently investigating generative and foundational models at the EU level. So we need to bring all these actors together because they have their own way of thinking in their own domains. And I think it is important to bring everyone at the table. Again, thank you very much for this event. We need to discuss a lot. I had a discussion a few days ago with a colleague from the UN on human rights and technology, and he told me about the current work they are undergoing with a report on their study on neurotechnology. And of course, we just have to also knock the door in Europe to the Council of Europe. The Council of Europe has done many things in the last years. The Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe adopted a resolution a few years ago with ethical principles for neurotechnologies proposed to the Council of Ministers, which has answered it also in 2020, I think. And so, yeah, it's important to continue and to work with these colleagues. Thank you very much.
I think it was very interesting the point that you just raised on consumer enforcers, but it's not only consumer and data protection, it's also health technology assessment. So there's also a law that deals with this type of, but usually when it goes to hospitals and or used for care. But all these, I mean, where do we place whether there is a right or there's not a right, or they're enforcing against neurotechnologies if there are so many actors at the table? To what extent are we able to break the silos that exist? I mean, organizations are like that. We have silos in ministries, we have silos in DGs, we have silos in between member states. So how are we going to overcome that thinking? And I think this is still to be found out how. But we know that there is need, and there needs to be coordination. I mean, with the laws that you have passed now, with for example AI, it already says that okay, you have a supervisory authority for AI, but you need to be coordinated with data protection, with machinery agencies and all that, no safety, machinery safety and stuff. So there is this issue. And another important point, now that you also raised the UNESCO process, the Council of Europe, I mean, at least this reflection will also help member states and the EU to act with one voice in all these international debates. And we need that, because we cannot be against each other in that. We need to have this common position as well when we talk internationally.
Well, thank you very much to everybody for taking the time to come this morning to the European Policy Center for this debate. I think that we have homework to do. From the EPC, certainly this was a conversation starter, and we hope to be able to work more on this topic, because just by seeing the questions and the points, there's like plenty of things to be done and to be investigated. So thank you very much, Paul Nemitz, Alberto, Gago, Thibaut, Kleiner, Trinidad, Sanoa, and Mark Dempsey for also their comment to the EPC. And again, for those who are in person here, we will have a reception next door. So I would very much like to welcome you to stay.